There we go.
And we're live.
We apparently are. Patrick, are you hearing feedback on your end?
I am not actually.
Huh. All right. Well, if you are hearing feedback, all right, hold on. I got to figure this out on my end.
Do I have to do a song and dance to keep everyone entertained?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what's causing it.
Oh, interesting. Nothing like live webcasting.
Let's see if that gets rid of it. I think so.
Any better?
Yeah, I was hearing everything twice, and on it, nope, didn't get rid of it at all. Huh.
It's just been that morning, folks. Charlie will explain shortly.
Patrick, I would just keep talking at this point and see if I can get this figured out.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome everyone to our second pre-PCA Convention Trade Show live show. My name is Patrick Lagreid. I'm out in Phoenix, Arizona. You are looking at Charlie Minato over on the other side, who is in Dallas, Texas, trying to resolve a little bit of tech issue, apparently, although Mike at Buckhead Cigars says we're good here, so that's a plus. At least, and now you're muted, Charlie. So that's no good. But anyway, so we are going to talk a little bit about the PCA Convention Trade Show, which is coming up in, boy, I lose count by how few days are left, but just under a month now. It's coming up July 10th through the 13th, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, seminars start on the 9th, and then the live show, the trade show piece of it, which is really what we tend to focus on, will start on July 10th, run the 10th, 11th, 12th, and then half the day on the 13th, and then everyone goes back home or on vacation and collapses for a little bit, and the cigar industry goes about its business for the next 360 days. So today it's kind of an interesting show. As everyone has seen and paid attention to, there are a number of companies who are announcing that they are not going to be at the trade show this year. And so today, Charlie and I are going to talk a little bit about that, and he'll go into more detail as soon as he gets his audio connections fixed up. But right now we are looking at, I think, right around 30 or 31 companies who have been at the trade show in years past. And usually that's about, our metric is 2019 and 2018 in some cases, to see if companies are going to be there. Obviously are known as the Big Four. Altadis General, Drew Estate, and Davidoff are not going to be there. That was announced prior to the 2020 show, which, as we know, didn't happen because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But since that time, a lot of other companies have joined in and said it's, for whatever reason, it's just not going to make sense for them to be there. Some of it's financial, some of it's health related, some of it is probably for reasons that companies aren't really disclosing. But there are some very notable companies, including the Flor Dominicana, who this week announced that they weren't going to be there. So it's going to make for an interesting show. So as Charlie and I were talking about topics for today's show, the idea of what would be the 10 companies who we're going to miss most, or who maybe the show will miss most for one reason or another. And we're going to spend some time talking about that today. Charlie, how's your audio? Sounds like you're
Yeah, I think I figured it out after closing everything and restarting. But yeah, so these four shows, Patrick is guest appearing for Brooks, who is on vacation this week. Brooks will be back here next week, same time and place. I still don't know what we're going to talk about next week. The following week, hopefully we will be able to talk about 10 products that we would like to see at the trade show that have been announced. At the moment, I don't think we could do that show with 10 products, or there'd be a lot of unannounced Jake White stuff on there. And like last week, because we did do a show last week, we have some prizes thanks to Drew Estate. That's the wrong computer. Patrick, do you want to go over the rules while I show off?
Absolutely. So if you watched show number 1, and it would help if the rules are back up there, but I don't remember them all.
Well, I got to show off the skateboard.
Well, that's true too. So our good friends at Drew Estate are providing a skateboard, and that's, you can see that's actually, that's a full-size longboard, I would assume.
Yeah, no, it's, I guess I could stand up and do this.
Yeah, don't stress yourself out. There we go. So there's your Drew Estate longboard. That is a Herrera Esteli Norteño design. And so we are going to give, I'd have to check this because I haven't seen the rules fully. But if you ask a question, and it's a good question during today's show, and you get selected, I believe you will be winning a skateboard. So we're going to keep an eye out for those. You can ask them on whatever platform you are on, and I believe it should aggregate into our comments. So we'll keep an eye out. We see Gabby here. We see Ted here. We see NY here. So again, at the end of the show, we'll pick our 3 favorite questions. The people who ask those questions will win a prize from Drew Estate. And so, Charlie, there actually are 3 skateboards. Is that right?
Yeah, 3 skateboards per show. And I don't know, for those of you that are unfamiliar, Drew Estate does this, or has traditionally done this every year at the trade show, where they have Subculture Studios decorate an item. So they usually pick a singular item, and then they put a whole mess, I would imagine more than 100 different paint jobs on the items. So there have been things ranging from non-cigar related items, like that longboard deck, which does not come with wheels from what I understand. They actually did a mini skateboard a couple of years ago that did come with wheels, and I have ridden a couple times. Not very well. They've done shoes, sandals, hard hats, spray paint cans, chivettas, cigar molds, all sorts of things. So it may not be a Herrera Esteli branded one. It could be one of Drew Estate's many other brands. It could be a general Drew Estate branded one. But they are interesting items, and we have a whole mess of them to give away. They will ship in late July directly from Drew Estate.
And of course, you have to be 21 or older. There's other terms and conditions there that you can see, but that's the real big one. So think of a good question during the show, ask it, and you might just win yourself a Drew Estate longboard.
Yeah, Patrick, what cigars are you smoking?
Well, Charlie, funny you should mention that. I'm actually not smoking a cigar because the building that I live in and am soon moving out of has had a smoke-free policy since January 1st, which is put a nice crimp into my life. So I am inside my apartment because it is also going to be hellaciously hot coming in Phoenix next couple of days. We are supposed to hit 117 on Wednesday. So not only is the temperature fun, but moving in that temperature is a blast. So I'm actually not smoking anything, just enjoying a nice cup of coffee from Sight Glass in Los Angeles. Charlie, what are you smoking today?
I'm smoking a... Really weird because my camera's died out. There we go. Illusione Cruzado. So there's that.
There you go.
All right. So I'm going to get started with the 10 companies that we are going to miss the most. These are not in any order that you understand. Like this is, we're about to do the company that I miss the 10th most or most in any particular order. And they're all on here. I mean, some of them are on here for very similar reasons and quite predictably, and some of them are on here for some weird reasons or weirder reasons. There are, as of this morning, I believe 36 companies that have told us that that were companies that exhibited in 2019 that are not exhibiting at this year's trade show. As Patrick mentioned, there's a whole mess of reasons ranging from the companies went out of business to the companies have COVID-related concerns to the companies don't think that the trade show is the best use of their money. And we will attempt as best we can to narrate some of them, but ultimately, I don't really think that we know the answers. In most cases, they're usually a combination of reasons for most of the companies that are on this list. So some of this is going to have to be speculation, and some of this is going to kind of be left up in the air about why exactly they aren't there. But that's also not really what this show is about. So number one on this list is a company that, if you are familiar with our IPCPR convention trade show coverage over the years, you should be quite familiar with. It's Davidoff of Geneva, USA. Davidoff was one of 4 large companies that announced in early 2020, well before the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic had hit the U.S., in the Drew Estate and General Cigar Company. Those are 4, if not the 4 largest companies, or 4 of the 5 largest cigar companies in the U.S. And they also are 4 of the 5 largest booths typically in any year. So Davidoff has, there's a lot of similarities, I would say, between those four companies, and we're certainly going to talk about some of the other ones of them later on. Some of those similarities about why we would miss them and why the trade show in particular would miss them is they're some of the largest booths. They tend to have a lot of new items that launch in and around the trade show. They bring a lot of staff, which is good for the trade show. And they also attract a lot of retailers and, quite frankly, media like us to their booths. They also spend a lot more money at the trade show than most other companies, and so their booths tend to be a lot more elaborate and things like that. So Davidoff certainly checks a lot of those boxes and then some. So like I mentioned, new product launches, that's the Davidoff 50 from 2018. Davidoff has done a whole host of launches, although typically what Davidoff likes to do is announce things right around now and then sort of go into the trade show with a little bit of that momentum where the stuff is maybe already starting to trickle out to a couple of stores or at least has been pre-sold ahead of the trade show. The other thing I would say that Davidoff did, at least in 2019, that I don't think I've ever seen another company do in the I guess now 10 years that I've been going to the trade show, is more than that actually. They were like doing like an actual like retailer education seminar. These are the two guys from UR New York, which are the brand ambassadors for Zeno, as well as they have their own sort of brand within the Davidoff family called Back to Back. Patrick, have you ever seen anyone do something like this on the trade show floor?
Nothing, I've thought about it. Nothing came to mind. There's certainly, I think, been maybe attempts at talking retailing in individual or maybe smaller groups. And certainly some seminar-based things, but I certainly don't remember anything that stood out as much as what Davidoff has done.
Yeah. And so, the other thing that Davidoff does at their trade show booths is that they, like I mentioned, they spend money and they do some things that are a bit more interesting. So this is quite frankly kind of tame, but they've done things like these custom motorcycles. They've one year the Camacho brand had some barrels on fire or kind of simulating fire. There were a couple years where the Avo brand seemingly was like sort of pushed in its own little spaceship-like compartment. Certainly when Room 101 was there was a whole bunch of creativity. I think the most impressive thing I've ever seen them do is this. And so we're going to put this up on the screen, and then I have to go here. Actually, I'm very concerned that no one Patrick, you can't hear that, right?
I cannot hear that. I was gonna say you probably have to give a little narration here.
All right, so let's pull this up. Sorry that you guys can't hear this. So what this is this was at the 2019 trade show. That's Klaus-Peter Kellner, who's one of Davidoff's brand ambassadors, or I don't know if that's the exact title, but we'll go with that. So they built this experiential rooms, because it technically wasn't one room, on the trade show floor attached to their booth. So you would go in here, there were sounds playing, which you unfortunately cannot hear. There were sights, obviously. You can see this is trying to simulate the volcanic sort of soil. And then you go from that very dark room into this room, which is supposed to simulate the tobacco fields, including the curing barns. And this, they were playing like sounds of the wind. There's like, you can kind of see there's soil on the ground. That's actually the soil from, I believe, Yamasa. It's the unique red soil that they've got there. And it smelled like a tobacco barn. There's a DeVillet Phantom on the floor for no reason. And you can see there's the cheesecloths up top. This was super, super interesting. Hopefully people can still hear me. Patrick, are you still there?
I can hear you. Okay,
well, that may not mean anything, but hopefully the people on YouTube and Facebook can still hear me. So anyway, so they had this room without, I guess I can do that. And it concluded with this Escuria room where they had a bartender, so you could get some actual taste here, and they would make you, I believe, one of two cocktails. This was, something that required a whole mess of resources, and I cannot imagine how much it cost. But super impressive. Obviously, it's always nice to get a cocktail in the middle of the trade show as well. And these are just things that there's only a handful of companies that honestly would are doing this, and Davidoff seemingly was the only one that would pull the trigger on something like this. So now that that's done, we're going to put this back up on the screen. The other thing that Davidoff would do that I would say is super unique, although there's companies that certainly have done similar things, albeit not to the same sort of extent that Davidoff does, is something that happens off the trade show floor. And so Davidoff, for many years, has hosted something called the Davidoff Dinner, and then got translated into something called Davidoff Golden Band Awards. And so it was a dinner that all of Davidoff's white label merchants were invited to attend, and would give out awards for things like best merchandising and best performance and things like that. It was a affair for many years, and it's now transitioned into more of an award ceremony that was at the Davidoff of Geneva since 1911 store on the Strip. It was an elaborate dinner, certainly the most sort of elaborate I'd ever been to at the trade show. Patrick, do you have a particular favorite Davidoff dinner moment? Because
there we go.
Removed from the screen.
Sorry, there we go. So it's been internet connections all day. As far as favorite Davidoff event, there we go. All good. All right. That's what happens when you click the wrong button on the back end site. Anyway, there's two Davidoff events that really stuck out, and one goes back to, I think it was 2013 or maybe it wasn't that. It was in New Orleans, the launch of Escurio. It's an outdoor event. It was festive. It was just, it was a really fun event. There was this performance art couple named the Bumbies who would do these like personality readings on old typewriters, and they wore like sunglasses and their faces were covered with masks. It was COVID protocol before COVID protocol was actually a thing. It was really interesting. And then I think to the first Golden Band Awards in 2016 or 17, that was really like the first, black tie. It was a thing to have a ticket. You got dressed up. The food was great. The performances were great. And then there was an after party that went quite late into the evening. And what I keep thinking about with that is that the trade show on its own is a big thing. What happens on the floor, that's the big part of it. But the trade show as an event and as a week or however many days you're there is as much about the ancillary events that go on, like Davidoff's Golden Bands and launch parties and things like that. So, I mean, it's tough for me to pick one. So I'm just going to say those two are the ones that really stood out, and I'm certainly going to miss.
All right. Patrick, you're up next.
Yeah, so we move on to our next company. And this is one that stood out for an interesting reason, which is Bugatti Group. And you might not be inherently familiar with Bugatti Group as much as you are with somebody like Davidoff, but in the last 2-3 years, Bugatti Group has become known for a pair of lighters that they released, and that one of which I reviewed. And they were particularly notable because instead of filling the lighters up with just a normal butane can, you'd get a little cylinder of butane and you'd swap that out. And I thought it was it was a good lighter. It worked fine. I wasn't necessarily crazy about the idea. I thought it's sort of like the electric car thing. It's great until you don't have a charger, and then you have a paperweight. And that was my same kind of thought with the Bugatti model, and that it was sort of bucking the trend too much of the established, everyone's got a can of butane, every shop, every cigar lounge, kind of thing. And then as we were starting to get to work on the show, we noticed that Bugatti Group had gotten a lot quieter, both on social media, we come to find, and then in day-to-day stuff. And we realized that their CEO, Yuval Hadaya, had left the company. A representative of the company had told us that Bugatti Group was having some challenges with their suppliers and that they were kind of going off the radar for a bit. And I thought that was really interesting because I had noticed that they were making good progress in terms of getting awareness about their lighters, getting their lighters into the hands of people. There are people in the industry who were using them. And the trade show is one of those things that can be a nice catapult and really gain some momentum for products like this, because it gives you the opportunity to put something in somebody's hand, show them the benefits, connect with people more individually, as opposed to just, hey, I'm going to send you a lighter, and then the lighter goes in the pile. And so for that reason, I'm disappointed not to see what Bugatti Group was working on, because I know they were working on some other projects. Secondarily, it's also a reminder that the accessory segment relies on China and global transport for their products. And as we've started to see, and Charlie, I'll let you kind of touch on this. This could be an issue for the cigar accessory side of the business more as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very different approach to the trade show because we're not as concerned with sales. We're more concerned with covering new items. And the accessory space is always one that we cover. It's a gigantic pain in the ass. And quite frankly, I don't think most of our other media contemporaries cover it because of how much work it involves. But typically, between the sort of 8 to 10 large accessory companies, and Bugatti's maybe a fringe when you start thinking about Zycar, Jetline, Lotus, Colibri, ST Dupont. Those companies are bringing dozens of SKUs each in any given year. And they generally, with maybe the exception of DuPont, they generally fall into one of two categories. So the first one would be for companies themselves have done a lot of the engineering and design. So they've worked to develop their own sort of design. They find a factory that's capable of making it, and they commission to make it. The other thing that I've learned over the years is that there are a lot of factories, particularly in China, that have designs for one reason or another. Either they have come up with on their own. They're designs where they basically have 75% of the parts and they just put them in a new case. They're designs where they're trying to knock off another factory's product for one reason or another, or there may be a design that somebody was going to do at that factory and then for whatever reason that project got pulled. And so they just have all these designs sitting around in a library, and you just basically go in there off the shelf and pick, like, I want that one, and you put my logo on this one, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like in particular, the latter has been completely decimated by the complications of the COVID pandemic. But even the former is certainly having some issues. And Zycar has been pretty quiet in the last 18 months. From what I understand, DuPont's going to have a few new items, but it's going to be a lot of new colorways, which I really think is the theme of, if there are new accessories this year, it's either or it's probably something in a new color. And it's caused so many problems that on our end with accessory reviews, it's particularly for lighters, but also for cutters. We went and bought some Zycar MTX scissors to potentially review, because we try to review new items, and there just haven't been that many new cigar accessories basically since the pandemic started. Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, in that note, we are going to talk about General Cigar Company. So General is another one of those 4 companies that announced in January of 2020 that they would not be attending the 2020 show. That extended into 2021. And General is a massive booth. It used to be a lot larger. It used to be a lot more intricate. But it's still, even in its 2019 form, was one of the biggest booths. For me, booth that I go to first thing in the morning, day one of the show, before the show gets busy, because there's so much to cover. General, unlike, I would say, the other companies, really seems to require all of its brands, and that includes anything from Macanudo, Cohiba, CAO, Hoya de Monterrey, Partagas, La Gloria Cubana, Diesel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They all seemingly have something new. For the most part, it's usually a new SKU or a new line. Sometimes they'll be like, all right, we're going to just rebrand all of Partagas this year. And what that means is that when you go to the General booth, it's like going to like a career day, I would imagine, where you literally are shepherded around the booth from one brand to the other. And it's like, okay, here's our new Partagas 10 Ducatas. And then you go and it's like, okay, here's the new Hoya de Monterrey release. Here's the new CAO releases. And certainly for Macanudo, CAO, and Cohiba, there tends to be a few new items. Those are General sort of bigger brands. The other thing that happens at the trade show, which is interesting with General, is they also seemingly, usually with either CAO or Cohiba, have something that's pretty interesting. So this was a release called Cohiba Silencio, which actually had been out for a little while, but they decided to finally sell it in these ashtray boxes. Certainly the Cohiba Spectre, which is the $90 flagship Cohiba line. That packaging is always interesting, and it's always interesting to see what they do with CAO. And so General is this big monstrosity. It's a booth that's always busy. There's always people moving around it. There seems to be a lot of orders being written. And in 2021, if General was at the trade show, it would be even more interesting. And that's because not because of CAO Flathead V19. That's because earlier this year, they announced STG, which is General's parent company, announced they were basically going to split the General Cigar Company portfolio in half. They were going to take what I would say are probably the better selling brands from what I gather. So Macanudo, Cohiba, CAO, and a couple others, and those were going to remain with General. And then they hired on a new sales staff to launch what they call Forged Cigar Company. And so it represents La Gloria Cubana. It's got Diesel in its portfolio. They also sort of took, is it El Rey del Mundo? No. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. They took one of the brands that they previously were selling as a private label, and they basically switched that over to Forged. And so that meant that STG now has 2 premium cigar companies selling cigars to wholesale accounts in the U.S. For consumers, this is completely irrelevant. But for stores, it now means that you can't go to your General rep if you want to buy Diesel, for example. And my question to you, Patrick, is do you think if, let's say, they were going to go to the trade show, do you think we'd see 2 separate booths with like different places of the show, clear identity, or do you think we would see them just in one big booth trying to explain what Forged Cigar Company is and why it has its own identity?
Well, I would like to think, and I would certainly hope that they would do this, that they would create their own separate second booth. I think the last thing that you need is maybe added confusion might not be the right word, but you need to give Forged an identity. And it doesn't affect us as much. And I think it's almost interesting because there's some overlap in terms of who's sending news about Forged and where.
Well, I think it's very clear. Like Forged is a sales company.
Absolutely.
I mentioned this in our walkthrough yesterday. I feel like for the consumers in particular, I should mention this. All of the production is still being handled at the same factories that was being done at General. All of the marketing seemingly is being done by the same people that were doing the marketing for General. It just seems like a sales company. And sorry to cut you off there.
No. But I think that I don't know how the retailers feel about it if Forged has gotten its own identity in terms of the marketplace. I think if you put Forged and General in the same booth, the dilution and the overlap probably might be more than what Forged could benefit from in terms of getting the retailers to understand what it is, what it feels like, what who the people are, all that kind of stuff. That would be my hope. Now, there's the other side of me that says, well, it may just be cheaper for General to get a big booth and put a wall between them and say, okay, we're going to, you're going to walk around the partition and then you're going to be on the Forged side of things. I don't know if that makes the most sense, but I would like to think that were they to be there, that Forged would be given as much of its own space and its own identity as possible just to further establish what it is. Because the other thing too is this thing was launched during a pandemic, so it wasn't like there was a traditional big rollout. And again, I know it's a sales company and not necessarily a consumer focused company, but you would like to think that they would have probably liked to have launched it when shops may not have been under limited capacity, people had health concerns, all the things that go into impeding the launch of any business in the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting. I've not spoken to the people at SCG about this, but I'd be very curious to know if Forged would have happened if COVID had not happened. I think that it seems logical to think that Forged probably would not happen if General was still going to the trade show. I'm guessing that it was pretty easy to say, hey, we're saving all this money not going to the trade show on things like booths and travel, and so we can afford to hire 10 more reps essentially. But there is at least some evidence that previously STG did have 2 separate booths. STG Lane, which is a tobacco company primarily, with Forge doesn't happen if General's at the trade show. I imagine if anyone tried to guess the 10 companies we would list, then probably not on anyone's radar.
Yeah, and that
Patrick?
is Sanpari and La Instructora. Now, you may not, again, be familiar with these companies, but if you follow the trade show and you've looked for our most commented on posts, you've probably stumbled across them. So Sanpari and La Instructora is a company or brands companies that were founded by Aaron Said and some business partners. They're made at Tabacalera La Palma in the Dominican Republic. The Sanpari line is French for without equal, if I'm not mistaken. and they try and really establish themselves as high-end premium cigars. And obviously the decision on that is up to the consumer. I've generally enjoyed them, as well as the La Instructora line. But what seems to really be the focal point, at least as our coverage happens of the PCA trade show, is Aaron himself when he does the videos. The company debuted a couple years ago, and look, I don't know if Aaron's doing a troll job on people. I've hung out with him outside the show. He's pretty consistent, although I think the video camera tends to bring out a little bit more of it. But beyond that piece of it, there's also the reality that this is a company trying to sell high-end cigars to retailers. It doesn't have a huge sales force. And there is something about the trade show environment that allows a company or a brand like Sanpari and La Instructora to get their cigars into retailers' hands a little bit more efficiently, and with the idea of explaining, look, why does this cigar have a $20, $30, $40 price point? And Charlie, I know that's something that you found particularly interesting about, why about they're not choosing to be there this year.
Yeah, I mean, so what's up on the screen right now is some comments in response to Aaron's video, which Patrick alluded to. There are more of them too, and this is only 2 years of Aaron. But what I've met Aaron as well. I don't think I know him as well as you do, Patrick. But I find it interesting that a company like this might be a case where, unlike a lot of companies who say maybe I don't need to be at the trade show because hand selling isn't important and the internet and blah, 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 blah. Sanpari seems like to be a company where that's probably a good thing, because if you just get samples sent to you and it's like, hey, look at our $25 plus cigars coming out of Tabacalera Palma. No disrespect to Hochi, but I think a lot of retailers would be like, why are you trying to sell me $25 cigars out of a factory that just does not make $25 cigars that I've ever heard of? And I think that's a legitimate question and argument. But I think if you sit down with Aaron, you will understand that he is not like most gringos that went to Latin America or Central America to make cigars. He has spent quite a bit of time there. He seems to understand it at a level that I would say is a lot more in depth than most people. And whether or not you think the cigars are worth it, or whether or not you think you could sell the cigars or anything, if you have a 30-minute conversation with Aaron, despite what our commenters might suggest, you do get the sense that he's put in the work, or at least enough of the work to kind of get to some of these points. You may think that $25 cigars are always going to be too expensive. Shout out to Lou Rothman. But, I do think you could have your mind changed. I think that for Aaron, if he was, concerned about opening up new accounts, it seems like face-to-face interactions are almost a must. But you said that he seems to be kind of at capacity as far as what he can do.
Yeah. I mean, when I talked to him and Johnny, who's involved with the company and kind of works with Palma on the whole, and Indian Head, who's the distributor, they certainly don't seem to be having trouble selling cigars. So I don't think they're necessarily looking at capacity issues or trying to add capacity. And the thing that is really critical about the Sanpari approach is, as what Aaron will tell you, is the sorting and the selecting process. He really wants the best of the best leaves with as little variance as possible. And so that's where the cost and the process of refinement and the time it takes to do that. So the production runs aren't huge. I mean, they're certainly not doing 250,000 of a certain line. But from what I've been told and what I would seem to believe, they seem to be selling cigars decently, and they do support their retailers. And I think that's the other half of that equation. Is you oftentimes will hear retailers say, yeah, the guy sold me a cigar, sold me 10 boxes of cigars, and I never heard from him again until he was calling for another order. And I have gotten the impression that Aaron and Johnny and that team do make a very concerted effort to make sure that the retailers are selling the product. They believe in the product. They have what they need, because it is a product that you have to put in front of a consumer and explain to them, why is this a $20, $30 cigar? And that's before taxes too.
Yeah. All right. So on a very, very different note, the next one is Altadis USA. This is another one of those 4 large companies. This is an interesting one in the sense that I don't cover this booth, and Patrick does cover this booth, but I certainly have been in the Altadis booth. I've covered it, I believe, once, or been part of the coverage of it. it is, like I mentioned with Davidoff, there's a lot of similarities between these four large companies. They tend to have big booths. They tend to spend a lot of money. They tend to bring a lot of people. They tend to bring a lot of retailers in their booths, and they tend to have new lines. That being said, if I was trying to give each one of them their own sort of unique identifier that separates them from the bunch, Altadis is certainly the one that I would say is the most corporate. And, that has its pros and its cons. On one hand, it can feel quite sterile in the Altadis booth. On the other hand, they know where their bread is buttered. It's selling, Monte Cristo white label. It's selling Romeo y Julieta Reserva Real. Every once in a while, they'll try an experiment like they did with Trinidad Espirito or Henry Clay Warhawk. Sometimes it'll go off the walls, like when they did Warlock back at IPSBR 2010, if I'm not mistaken, is when that project came about. But Altadis, on the other hand, everything's like really buttoned up and professional, and things run on time, and they have a very, not a script per se, but they know exactly what they're going to try to tell you when you are in the booth. They also do things like give away cars that are things that large companies can afford to do that small companies cannot afford to do. And so I would suspect this year we probably won't see very many companies, if any, attempting to give away a vehicle on the trade show floor. And I think that some of that's going to be maybe not the car giveaway specifically, but I think some of that energy of large items given away, which is sort of a very traditional aspect. Another company, Phillips and King, was very famous for daily at the trade show. They would have a raffle where they'd raffle off a Rolex. Certain companies would give away cash and things like that. These big companies are the ones that can afford to do it and the ones that do it. And I just don't know that we're going to see that happen. And I think that that's a loss for the trade show as a whole. It may not be something, we're not eligible and wouldn't ever enter any of those contests, so I could care less about the lack of card giveaway from my own personal standpoint. But it is something that's going to, I think, maybe lose a little bit of energy from the trade show. The most interesting thing to me with Altadis is in 2020, after basically 2 decades of being owned by what is now known as Imperial Brands, Imperial decided to sell its premium cigar interests. So that included Altadis USA, which is the U.S. company that distributes just in the U.S. Monte Cristo, Romeo y Julieta, H. Upmann, a handful of other brands, basically all Cuban marks, but only in the U.S. It also included JR Cigar and Santa Clara. JR is the second largest retailer in the U.S. and the world, I would imagine. And it also included a 50% stake in Habanos Aseado, which is the company that is responsible for the global sales and distribution of Cuban cigars. And it was sold to what we are led to believe is a Chinese buyer or a group of Chinese buyers or Chinese-based buyers. They have gone out of their way to make it not known who they are. By my best efforts and the efforts of others, we certainly have some ideas as to who they are. But it would be curious to know, because Patrick, I haven't really noticed any changes in my interactions with Altadis. Have you, since they've been purchased?
In terms of the interactions that we have that are involved in our jobs, no. It seems like it's fairly stable. Emails are still being answered relatively timely. Shipment, samples still arrive, stuff like that. But I think what's most interesting about that is the last time that I was around a large group of Altadis employees was the 2019 trade show. And I can tell you for sure there was apprehension, maybe, uncertainty, concern. I think when you know that your company is the block, is for sale. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you had actually written a piece right either at the start of the trade show or during the trade show, because I remember being asked by somebody at the company. It says, boy, you've put a lot of conversations on my plate today because of this story. And again, forgive me if the timing is off. But I think that would be one of the more interesting parts, and one of the conversations you just don't get to have in the same manner when you're doing it over email or text or phone, is, does it feel like it's stable, or does it feel like, well, we have an owner now, you have a new, whoever this entity is, does it still feel like there's changes coming? And I just don't know if we'll get a great answer to that.
Yeah, I think the piece came out in the fall, so I don't think it was actually at the trade show.
Okay.
But unless you're referring to like
No,
Trinidad Espirito launch post,
no.
but I don't think that's what you're
It may have been
referring
a
to.
different time. I just remember. I remember more the conversation and the person than the timing of it.
No, but you do bring up an interesting point, which was that not only was there a lot of apprehension about the sale, but the 2019 trade show was sort of the last part of what was a massive transition for Altadis USA, particularly the people that we deal with, and quite frankly, the larger U.S.-based business at Imperial. Javier Stadas, who's the head of Tabacalera USA, which is the sort of parent of Altadis and JR that reported to Imperial and now presumably reports to their new owners. He's still there. Rafi Nadal, who's the head of product capability and is known from his time at Aging Room, is still there. But a lot of the people sort of at the, below that were either brand new or were about to leave the company. So we were at a dinner that they invited media to before the trade show started. That dinner was, I think, hosted by Rob Norris. He more or less during the trade show announced that he would be leading his role as the head of Altadis USA. At that time, JR Cigar had just gotten a brand new head. I don't know exactly. I forget if they're still using director or if they're now using CEO titles for those specific jobs. The marketing department was sort of halfway through its transition. And so, yeah, it was a weird time. And it's interesting that, the sale, if anything, seems to have stabilized things, at least from our interactions, because the personnel, aren't changing and have been in their jobs for a little while.
Absolutely. So that moves us on to our next company. And if you've been following Half Wheel the last couple of years, you've undoubtedly seen this company, Hoya de Nicaragua, near the top of our cigar lists, making a lot of news stories. Cigar of the Year in 2018 with the Numero Uno, back when it was the event-only release, went on to become a limited production but regular ongoing release. And then in 2019, the company repeated with the Antonio Sete as our Cigar of the Year. They've certainly been at or near the top of our lists for the, again, since 2018. And what I found interesting about Hoya de Nicaragua is that they've really used the last 2-3 years to finally seemingly get the traction in the higher end part of their portfolio after the rebrand that brought in things like Hoya Black and Hoya Silver and Hoya Red that maybe didn't quite have the immediate effect that the company was hoping for. And again, this is without seeing their, their sales numbers, but certainly it seems like they've focused on the higher end lines and done incredibly well at it. And the other piece that I found interesting about Hoya is that they were one of the companies that really did use the trade show as a venue to launch products. And I think that's sort of dovetailed in with Drew Estate a little bit as Drew Estate distributes them. But they were definitely using the trade show as a launch venue. Juan Ignacio Martinez and his team have done an amazing job over the last couple of years, and looking at the trade show as an event to see what the company has done to catch up with them, where they're going, what their inspirations are as their, that next generation's impact gets felt more and more, was something I always really look forward to. And again, they seem to be making incredible cigars. They've got the Dos Cientos, if I'm not mistaken, that's coming out in August, which celebrates an anniversary in Latin America. It's going to be a big global launch event. So they've got great things in the works. It would just have been nice to actually see them in person. So, Hoya de Nicaragua is a company that I remember as being a staple in a lot of humidors when I started getting into cigars seriously at the end of 2000, or the end of the 2000s. And then it kind of drifted away from some places, at least in the places I shop. And then it's really seemed to come back with a vengeance in the last 2 to 3 years. And I will tell you, between Numero Uno, Sete, Cuatro Cinco has seemingly re-entered the conversation as a really good cigar. It was one that I don't think quite got the initial impact that maybe they were hoping for. And then Cinco de Cadas comes back in and you go, oh, I'm going to revisit this portfolio. And you realize, yeah, Cuatro Cinco is actually a pretty darn good cigar. So those are really some of the big reasons I'm going to miss Hoya de Nicaragua. Charlie, and thanks for putting up the Dos Cientos box.
Sorry, I've had to do some housekeeping. Yeah, no, I agree with most of your thoughts about Hoya de Nicaragua. I think the only thing I would say is obviously the Antonio Sete was not that expensive of a cigar. I think what's interesting about Hoya de Nicaragua, particularly as we sort of get to the last three companies on this list, if I'm not mistaken, or three of the four in particular, I guess, is that they were operating in a space that is, I think, for our readership, very interesting, which is sort of that medium full to full $10 to $12 cigar range that got super crowded. Certainly 10 years ago, it wasn't maybe 10 to 12, maybe it was the 8 to 10 range. So the places where Taiwahe and Illusione and Drew Estate and companies like that like to compete, and they've sort of shifted at least some of their releases into going to a different place. So Antonio Sete is a little bit lower price point, a little bit milder of a cigar. I certainly would not describe it as a mild cigar despite the wrapper. And then you've got something like Numero Uno that I would describe as a mild cigar, but is a much different price point. And I think that's been helpful to them to sort of say, okay, the space that we used to operate in with Antonio has gotten a lot more crowded. We are no longer making the strongest cigars in the market. That's no longer going to be the selling point. Let's try to do some other things. I think for, the early parts of Half Wheel's existence, the 2012 to 2014 range, that was, let's try to make some $5 and $6 cigars. I don't know how well that's worked. But certainly in terms of the accolades, I think them going after higher end price points and maybe not as focused on the medium full profile has been a great thing for them. All right. So the company that sort of threw me for a loop there, and I would not put in the sort of medium full $10 to $12 price point range, though they certainly make some cigars in that range, is Southern Draw. This one maybe isn't a Sanpari like out of left field weirdness, but Southern Draw is a company that I covered at the last two shows in 18 and 19. And what's remarkable to me about them is their small booth. It's not a 40 by 40 by any stretch of the imagination, but their small booth is constantly busy to the point where I had to come back one year multiple times just to try to get Robert Holt to give us an interview for 2 minutes. So this was their 19 booth, if I'm not mistaken, and this is their 18 booth. And this is a company that for me seems like one that if the trade show is a sales trade show in its current format is going to succeed, a company like Southern Draw has to be there because these are the companies that, go to the trade show, have busy booths, are writing orders. They don't have the same sort of name as Altadis or Davidoff, and they certainly don't have the size of the booths of General Cigar Company or Drew Estate. But this is sort of the bread and butter of the trade show. Because otherwise, you might as well just do a trade show with your four largest vendors and call it a day. You need companies like Southern Draw that have room to grow, that are growing, and that have some organic demand, but also can get some of some of that benefits of going to a place like a trade show where there's presumably a whole bunch of retailers they've never seen or haven't seen in a while. And I think their reasons for not going aren't related so much to the economics. It sounds like there was some health and safety concerns that led to their not going to both PCA as well as the TPE trade show that took place last month. But Southern Draw is one of those companies that stands out to me as, it's not going to be certainly by booth size or sales numbers the largest miss of the show. But if I was running the trade show, this would be a bad sign of companies like this. And once again, I think it may be more health related than anything else, but this would be a bad sign for the future of the trade show if companies like this aren't showing up. Patrick, do you have any company that comes to mind for this trade show type theme that I just mentioned? As I said, with the softball question.
The one that came to mind when you mentioned Southern Draw and why you think, that a company like that should be there is a company like Casa Cuevas, which I know does really well out here in Phoenix, great representation, and maybe doesn't do so well quite in other parts of the country. But I think it's one of those things where, a retailer may have heard about them. Again, they're in a spot where the rep isn't the best, or they don't have a rep. And it gives them a chance to stop by and really see the company in person, meet the people, see a buzz, see that there's people who are there writing orders. And so that was kind of my initial comparison. Certainly different companies in different places, but that medium size, small, medium company with a lot of room to grow. Casa Cuevas has its own factory. They've been they've made a lot of private brand stuff. So they've got the space to grow and to do things. And I think that's where, when you look at the trade show as, the 4 or 5 most important days in the industry, or very important days in the industry, but it's what you do the other 360 days that really pay it off, that would be a company like that I would think of. So, the Casa Cuevas, Southern Draw kind of company. which takes us to another company that's had a lot of success at the trade show, and that is RoMa Craft Tobacco. This is an interesting one for a couple of reasons. Number one, last year would have been RoMa's 10th anniversary. Number two, they always seemingly have a busy booth. People know about it. They find it. It's an interesting booth to stop by, not only for the cigars, but they use a company, I believe it's called Wicked Anvil. Charlie, you're more familiar with them than I am, but to do a lot of their designs that are in the booth. So you have this cigar display that was made by Wicked Anvil. It's a fun booth. It's not necessarily like loud and festive like some others, but it's definitely a booth that has good energy. People search it out. And then, of course, you get to hear what Skip's up to and how much he paid to have his banners hung and what that always entails. So RoMa's not going to be there this year. And I think an interesting part of that was, how were they going to celebrate their 10th anniversary? And this is something we've talked about for a while. And what RoMa had done originally was schedule an event in Austin for September of last year, or September 2020, that had to get postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic and was held Memorial Day weekend this year. And Charlie, you were there, and I want you to kind of talk about it and touch on that. But again, I think, not having a company like RoMa there is interesting, because much like with Southern Draw, it's a good place for people to get to know them. Certainly they hopefully have been heard of by any retailer worth his salt, or in the last couple of years. But for a booth that I would say needs to be on the trade show floor, but has a lot of reason to be there, RoMa's certainly one I'm going to miss.
Yeah, so I was at Weasel Fest, which was 2 weekends ago. It was something. I mentioned this in a review. I don't think I would describe it as a cigar event. I've been to a lot of cigar events. It was very, very different. It kind of reminded me, or I would imagine, if like one of my neighbors won the lottery and decided that they were going to have just a blowout block party. And they were basically just going to do like whatever they wanted to do, but they were going to invite the whole neighborhood along with it. That's kind of what this felt like. It felt like a celebration of not just RoMa Craft and their partners, and there were a lot of retail stores that, particularly the larger retail accounts for RoMa Craft, that have been with the company for most of its time selling cigars through retail stores, but also a lot of its more passionate fans. And then it was kind of a celebration of a lot of the things that Skip and Mike, the co-owners of the company, are big fans of. So there were 2 hip hop artists, including Scarface, who is a noted Houston rapper. There was Superphonicos, which is not a band that I'm terribly familiar with, but from what I understand is a very popular Latin, it's called Big Band. And there was a lot of alcohol. There were a lot of cigars. There were cigars for sale, though it didn't seem like they were overly concerned with selling them. And quite frankly, I was thankful to be along for the ride, because I don't know how RoMa Craft possibly could have turned a profit, even with the ticket prices and all the sales that they did of all the cigars. It seemed like a very expensive event for the number of people that were there. I don't know if they're planning on doing another one, but certainly if they are, I would highly recommend you go. It was, from a music perspective, I'm not sure you're going to really get much better at a cigar event. From a food perspective, they had both Style Switch, which is one of the noted Austin barbecue restaurants, as well as a Tex-Mex restaurant that I can't remember off the top of my head, though if I look closely, I can probably find it. Valentina's, who actually served some of the brisket that Style Switch had cooked earlier. And the alcohol was flowing, and like Skip likes to do, at a certain point, it became an open bar, regardless of what ticket you bought. So it was a lot of fun. I do think, you sort of said that there's a lot of reasons why RoMa Craft should be there. And this helps to transition for our next company as well. But there's also like one glaring thing as to why RoMa Craft shouldn't be there, which is that RoMa Craft says, and if we take them at their word, and I tend to believe them about as much as I believe anyone, that they basically don't have any extra inventory. Skip will sometimes post surveillance video of like the warehouse when a shipment comes in, and it more or less completely leaves the door within a day or two. And so if they don't have any more product to sell, then going to the trade show is just an unbelievably expensive activity to go say hi to people. And so, I think there's a handful of companies, including some that are still going, where, I I think there's some reasons as to why Padron's still at the trade show that are like uniquely beneficial related to the trade show. Largely that they get to see a whole bunch of retailers that I imagine they probably don't see throughout the year because of the way they run their company. But like, is Padron trying to open up new accounts at the trade show? I have no inkling that is the case. Fuente even puts signs out on their booth that says no new accounts. And so for companies like that, there is some question about from a sales perspective if the trade show is still working. And certainly the next one on our list is in that boat as well, which is the Flor Dominicana. They announced earlier this week that they, after sort of being on the fence seemingly or not committing one way or the other for a while, they finally announced that they would not be attending the trade show. La Flor Dominicana for I'm not a La Flor retailer, so I cannot speak to this directly. But I imagine if we put 10 La Flor Dominicana retailers in a room and asked them to name their number one complaint with the company, they would probably all list back orders, at least from all the unsolicited comments I've heard from over the years regarding La Flor's back order issue. It seems like that's a very real issue. Back orders are both a sign that your products are in demand and also to some degree a negative problem. And La Flor is not the only one, though. When I do think of cigar companies that are backordered, I do think of La Flor before anyone else. And similar to RoMa Craft, there's something to be said about like, if you can't fulfill your current orders, I don't know why you need to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to a trade show to take more orders. I can only imagine some of our retail commenters are probably, or not, probably co-signing the La Flor backorder issue. But it's interesting. I think from a like really in the weeds cigar industry politics aspect, I find it very interesting. La Flor is one of the sort of 10 prominent CRA board member companies. I don't know if all these companies are on the board, but the list would be, if I can do this off the top of my head, Arturo Fuente and JC Newman, my father and Tai Wahe. You've got Ashton, Padron, Rocky Patel, Alec Bradley, Oliva, and then La Flor Dominicana. I think I got all of them. And so those companies are very prominent about their support for CRA. I am of the belief, Patrick, I know you may differ here, that if the CRA companies, sort of drop to their very outspoken support for the trade show, that the trade show is probably done for. I just don't know how it can survive. And most of these companies are going out of their way to try to get people to come to the trade show and support it. And the Flor Dominicana has certainly been a massive supporter of the end game of the PCA, which is the legislative aspect, through its work with the CRA. They're one of the companies that puts the tax stamps on their boxes that indicates they donate a certain amount of money per cigar sold to the CRA. But I guess they decided from a business standpoint, which I think seems reasonable enough, that this was not worth it. Patrick, you have a differing opinion about the CRA companies and whether or not the trade show could survive without them.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to think that the CRA companies are necessarily the glue holding the show together. Now, certainly, if all 10 of them were to say, hey, we're, for whatever reason, good, legitimate or controversial or whatever, we're not going to go, that creates a completely different discussion as to the viability of the trade show. I don't know. I guess it was my initial reaction when I heard you say that that if it wasn't for these 10 companies, there would be no trade show. And I sort of don't like to think that, because I like to think the cigar industry is a little bit bigger and more vibrant, and that, retailers would still show up and things like that. Although, again, there is a very, very real reality that sets in. If you say, well, you take those 10 companies out, that's a lot of booth space to fill.
Yeah, Patrick, I'm going to kill some dead air while you do housekeeping in our private chat for a second, and
Sure.
then I'll let you get to your next one. So, okay, so Patrick looks like he's seeing the private chat message. There we go. But yeah, we'll get to it because I think some of the comments are about this, but like there's a lot of questions about what the trade show looks like going forward. But I do think that I'm curious to know if the sort of outspoken CRA member company support continues post 2021. But I do think it would be a real problem if a handful of them, other ones pull out. And I also be curious to know what would happen if La Flor had sort of made this announcement or confirmed that they weren't going months in advance, if we would have seen any of the other CRA companies also pull out. So, Patrick, now that you've done your housekeeping.
Which takes us to, I believe, company number 10, if I'm not mistaken, Charlie, because we didn't number these. But Drew Estate. And I think when you think of a trade show floor, it's almost impossible not to think of Drew Estate. And again, these aren't ranked, so please don't construe this as our number one most missed company.
So it is the one paying for this video, although not for apparently you'd have a working camera.
That is very true. Let me.
Patrick fixes his camera. I would like to point out, I don't know if you full size screen this and you take the picture that's up there. If you look in the far right hand corner, you can see a Drew Estate logo. And you can kind of get the sense if you look down that aisle that there's more of them. Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah. So, this was a big year for Drew Estate. It was the 25th anniversary of the company. They had announced new products like they do every year. They, again, like Hoya de Nicaragua, who I talked about earlier, they do use the trade show as a way to release new products, which I always found interesting because Jonathan Drew was seemingly the guy who was on Instagram pulling new cigars out of his duffel bag or whatever, and sort of seemed to break the model of, the trade show release being when new cigars are released. Like I say, 25th anniversary, huge presence at the show. You can't miss the booth. They put a lot of energy and effort into it. The water tower, the bridge, in the back of that was, I don't remember what year that was, but that was when Acid was celebrating its 20th anniversary. They had a special room designed just for that. It's like, it's sort of like every booth we've talked about. It's busy. There's not a lot of open tables. There's a lot of movement. There's people working behind the scenes in a support role who, make sure that coffee's poured and cigars are on the table and the ashtrays are emptied and things like that. And it was their 25th anniversary, which is a big deal, and one that, in my opinion, should be celebrated in front of the rest of the cigar industry. We can have that discussion, and there's a financial component to it too, which they sponsor the aisle markers. I'm sure they've probably sponsored some other things. Charlie, I know, did a little bit more of a recap than I did on it. But it kind of led to this thought of, when you look at the sum of what Drew Estate brings to a trade show, if you were the PCA and could take one company off this list to have back, who would it be? And you can make a case for a lot of them, but I keep coming back to Drew Estate, both in terms of size of presence, energy of presence, just the whole mess of it. Because even though I don't cover the booth, I tend to think of Drew Estate as one of those booths I come out of feeling more energized than when I walked in.
I mean, Brooks comes out feeling exhausted because he has to cover it.
Sure.
But, if you don't have to cover it, sure. But yeah, no, I think I would, there's two that stand out. I think if you could get Davidoff to come back with the Davidoff dinner and its full black tie affair, I think you'd probably take that, because it would also encourage a whole bunch of those retailers, and the people that carry Davidoff white label tend to be the most prominent brick and mortar retailers in the country, or at least a very large swath of what I would consider to be the most prominent ones. But I don't think Davidoff has much interest in doing that. They stopped doing the dinner years before they made the announcement that they were no longer going to be at the trade show. And so I would take Drew Estate. I think Davidoff wasn't going to agree to do the dinner, because Drew Estate likes putting their logo everywhere, including all over our website for a trade show that, oops, it was my computer apparently, just decides to kill itself. That, they're not even going to be at. They decided to sponsor all of our coverage for it. And like I mentioned, they were putting up signs in the aisles. They just love putting their name all over things. And, that's a lot of money for the PCA. And they also bring, I think they have the largest roster of badges of any company, and I don't think it was remotely close. All right. Q&A time?
Yeah. So I know that I was looking through, and as you alluded to earlier, lots of questions about.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna give you the first question I will read it, and then.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were close to me.
Yeah, no, sorry. I just have to scroll up a little bit. All right. So, Carrie asked a very logical question that we haven't gone over today, which is: are there any new companies that are having their first appearance at the show? I can think of a couple, Patrick. Curious to know how many you can come up with here.
Oh boy.
One is like a real kind of head scratcher.
Yeah, I can think of one for sure.
Do I need to say it so you don't script the name?
No. I'm not your voice detecting on what's that?
Do you want to list that company and we can see maybe it's not the company that I'm thinking
Well,
of.
the one I was thinking of was Bocock Brothers.
So that's one of the ones I'm thinking of. So that's a new company out of Houston that's got cigars made in Honduras. And it sounds like they're also going to have some stuff that's made in Nicaragua. The other one that I thought of, which is like the real tough one, is Ortega, which is the new company from Michael Herklotz and Brendan Scott. It is the company that bought Michael and Brendan both used to work for Nat Sherman, and they bought the rights to the Nat Sherman cigar brands from Altria. So they will be making their own versions. They're the same cigars, same factories, same names. The only difference is that brands like Timeless and Host won't say Nat Sherman on them. They'll say Ortega on the secondary band. They also have Ortega itself is going to be the debut line for the brand, and that will be available for order at the trade show. Those are the only two that came to mind on my end. Certainly, if we went to Basecamp, I think there's a couple of companies I've never heard of that have been added to the list, but there's something called literally the cigar ashtray. Like I have no idea if that's a new company, but certainly I don't recall seeing the cigar ashtray as an exhibitor listed at the trade show.
Right. So yeah, there are a few. I would be interested, and not to kind of dovetail on this, but will there be a year where there are no companies making their first appearance? Just kind of given where the industry's heading and stuff like that.
We thought that might have been the case in 2017 post FDA, but it still wasn't, because there are also companies that have been around that decide to go to the trade show for the first time.
True. Very true. Yeah, I guess it's that question.
Seemingly no shortage of new companies.
Yeah, I guess it's the question of being at the trade show, being a company versus being a company in business. But
all right. The next question, I believe, is the one you chose.
Yeah. So Jared Saunders asked, do you think the trade show is coming to a point where it needs to rebrand from primarily a sales-based show and into more of a showcase educational opportunity for companies?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have been quite clear that this current rendition of the trade show seems like it has no ability to survive, and well before the companies that announced they were pulling out pulled out. I think that the trade show needs to be a lot smaller, and the booths need to be a lot smaller. I mean, we have a 10 by 20 booth that has as little frills as you possibly could have. We have power, we have internet, we have some walls, we got some basic tables and basic chairs for us to work out of. It looks like somebody took a closet and turned it into a call center, essentially. That thing still costs, at a minimum, it's well over 10 grand just to get tables, chairs, booth space, and some walls. So to do something like even what RoMa Craft does is not 10,000. It's tens of thousands, and very quickly gets close to six figures. And that's before you factor in travel and all those sorts of other things. So these booths need to get smaller. I do think that there needs to be more of an educational component to the trade show. And the other part that I don't think we talked about really at all today is that the trade show, is a place that retailers primarily go to because they get big discounts. So not only are you having to spend all this money if you're a manufacturer to construct a booth, but then you're going to sell a cigar that normally you might sell for $5 wholesale, but now you're selling it for $4.33 wholesale.
Right.
And so that's a math problem that I just don't think there's really an end game to, unless there's just an explosion in the number of cigar retailers.
Charlie,
doesn't seem.
Can I call a quick timeout? I'm having some really serious audio issues on your end, and it seems like, as Stratman said, your audio sounds like a dry cigar.
All right.
I don't know if there's anything you can do about that, and John agrees. Nice, Ben. Nothing against your voice, Charlie, because I've had my voice criticized numerous times, but it's the audio equivalent to the burn on a Magic Toast. Wow. I like it. It's funny. That's good. We're going to try and reboot Charlie's audio really quick. But yeah, I mean, I'll dovetail on that. Look, I think the trade show has a ton to offer to retailers and to manufacturers. One of the problems that I think we're all seeing, though, on that other note, is the world is moving to a less in-person method of doing things. And I think that the idea of getting people to take a day or 2 or 4 or 7 to come to an event with maybe more vague goals, the selling piece of it is tangible. That you can go in, you can buy cigars, you can get a discount, you can get a 3-in-1 or a 5-in-2 or whatever your incentive is for the trade show week. You can be one of the first to get new cigars. You can get some FaceTime with people, but you can certainly get a more tangible result from that method. And moving it to an educational method maybe makes it a little bit more challenging to convince people to come out. And I think but look, that's the reality of the world, is that things, the world changes, and you got to find ways to address those changes. If you're not, you're going to get left behind. I don't necessarily think that needs to be a complete shift over to just more of a showcase educational opportunity for companies. But I definitely think it needs to incorporate that, and it needs, to figure out those ways to deliver on the non-tangible aspect of it. Make this like the seminars have to be great. I've long said, get a furniture company or 6 in there to set up some space to show off, what different furniture looks like in different settings, because we've all seen the oversized brown leather club chairs, but I'd have to think that there would be some furniture companies that would be interested and available to show off their options that aren't those kind of things. And whether that be from the smoke doesn't get in the fabric, to they're easier to clean, to the fabric's more durable, let companies like a Smoke Eater or Rabbit Air, for just companies in that space, give them the space to show off their products in actual use. I've long kind of thought that Rabbit Air with a 10x10 booth, a single booth space, that's not a great look for them, because it's not showing off what the product can do. You need a room, you almost need a 10x10 room to pump some smoke into and let the Rabbit Air go to work on it for a bit. Same thing with a Smoke Eater. Give the things that retailers want to see, and those intangible things a real place, and especially the things that keep brick and mortar retail in business, because we all know it's easy to order online, and you can take the retailer out of the equation, unfortunately, way too easy these days. So give the retailers that experience of how to make their stores better, because look, there are some really good retailers, and there are people who are retailers who do a decent job, but maybe just for whatever reason aren't as, either inherently talented or gifted. They maybe don't put as much emphasis on education and staying abreast of what's going on in the market. And I sort of look at it, it's like, take your best sports team. Like, this is why you have coaches for your teams, because so-and-so is a Major League Baseball player, is in the NBA, but it doesn't mean they don't need to get better and they can't learn things and they can't refine their game even more. And that's from the best down to the last guy on the bench. You want that retail segment to be as strong as possible. So that would be my sort of thought, and again, whether it's point of sale systems or furniture or Smoke Eaters or TVs, I mean, heck, make it. I would love to see if there's a company that was making something that was either adaptable or made for a smoky environment to keep your TV working better. So that's kind of my thought about it. A little bit of housekeeping. So Charlie is having a little bit of technical issue, and more importantly, his browser's having a technical issue. So I'm going to take another comment here, which, let's see here. So let's go. I want to, Charlie, I don't know if you can hear me. Ted Rogers, there we go. Do you think the trend of boutique cigars will continue, or is this just a fad? I think these smaller brands will eventually be bought out and be sold under a new brand. I will say that I think that the smaller boutique companies are not a fad. They certainly were new at a point and certainly seem to be a fad. But no, I think that there is room in the cigar industry for smaller boutique brands, just like there is in the world of spirits, watches, clothes, fashion. Every industry outside of like commodity based things has room for smaller companies. I think they can bring a different approach. They can certainly appeal to people who just say, I don't want a mass produced cigar. And I'm not talking like Swisher Sweets, but I'm talking about cigars that are, where they're everywhere. The big name, Cohiba, Macanudo, they're in every humidor. I certainly think there's that aspect that would work for them. Now, that all said, that's assuming that the business model stays stable for them. And that is going to vary a lot based on the type of company you are. If you are just a brand owner, you do not own a factory, you do not own any fields, you are, I don't know what the magic number of moving cigars is, but you're at or maybe even below that threshold. It may not be financially feasible, for you to do that. Now, if you're a company that has a factory, if you're a company that owns fields, and you're still on the boutique side, yeah, I think that can definitely work. And again, I don't know necessarily what the definition of boutique is anymore. I don't pretend to know it. I think it's a word that gets thrown around in hopes that people will bring their own definition to it and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's, it's the clothing store that's got 50 pieces on the shelf as opposed to Macy's, which is multiple floors of it, at least when Macy's was in its heyday. So yeah, I mean, look, I think that I definitely don't think boutique cigars is a trend any longer, which is probably the first thing I would speak to in your question. It is a component of the industry, and I think it will continue to be a component of the industry for as long as it makes sense, and as long as people are passionate about it. Now, again, if the market demands change and the cost of getting a cigar to market is so drastically different for a brand that doesn't own a factory or fields versus a company that does, yeah, that may force the hand of them. Now, when when that tipping point occurs, what happens to those brands? I don't know, because again, is the market that much better than, by keeping all those brands on, and do they have value? I don't know. So anyway, it looks like Charlie's computer has officially called it a day. So I am going to put a bow on this thing. If you are one of the 3 people that we selected your question, please email us at contest@halfwheel.com within the next 24 hours to claim your prize. Charlie will go over all that with you via email. Again, that's contest@halfwheel.com. So congratulations to our 3 winners who are going to be picking up a Drew Estate branded longboard. And I think with that is going to be it. Next Friday, there'll be another show. Topic still to be discussed. We'll have Charlie and Brooks on it. One more after that. And then before you know it, it'll be the end of June. And we will be making a beeline for July 9th, which is when the 2021 PCA Convention and Trade Show officially opens up with seminars. And then the show floor opens up on July 10th. So thanks so much for checking this out. Apologies for the technical issues, but hey, welcome to 2021, right? So for Charlie Minato, I am Patrick Lagreid. Thank you so much for checking out halfwheel.com. Reminder, if you were one of our contest winners, email contest@halfwheel.com within the next 24 hours. Thanks for watching. Keep it on halfwheel.com for all your cigar industry news and updates.